Hello, New Mexico, and welcome to another episode of Around the Roundhouse, a podcast featuring the policies, politics, and colorful personalities of the land of enchantment from the Roundhouse and beyond. My name is Daniel Chacón, and I'm the state government reporter for the Santa Fe New Mexican. Our guest this week is New Mexico Secretary of State Maggie Toulouse Oliver, a Democrat who has served in that role since 2016. Toulouse Oliver previously served as clerk of Bernalillo County, as well as state director for the League of Conservation Voters. Madam Secretary, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, it's such a pleasure to be here with you. I'm looking forward to it.
Right on. Madam Secretary, for folks who may be unfamiliar with your background, just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you ended up in New Mexico at the age of 3.
Well, my parents actually met each other and got married in Gallup, New Mexico. My dad was a doctor in the Indian Health Service, and my mom moved up to Gallup with her family when my grandfather bought 2 radio stations out there. And so it was like a second career. And they moved to LA when my dad did his fellowship in psychiatry at the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA. That's where I was born. But they decided at the end of the 70s, we really don't want to stay in LA forever, so we're going to move back to New Mexico. So that's how I ended up back out here at the age of 3. Grew up in Albuquerque and went to Whittier Wilson Highland High Schools, UNM, got my bachelor's and my master's in political science, and worked my way through college on political campaigns. I was a politics nerd unicorn from a very early age. And that's how I kind of ended up in the place of wanting to work on elections and wanting to work on ensuring people had the right to vote. And I was in the right place at the right time to throw my name in the hat for that position of county clerk.
And then obviously that led to the position that you're serving in now.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I never thought of running for clerk or secretary of state, but I think when you do the kind of work that I did for years, where you're talking to people every single day about how to vote, where to vote, how to make a plan to vote, what are the rules to vote, poll watching. I was on the board of registration in Bernalillo County, all of those things. I kind of saw an opportunity to make a more, I would say, voter-centric voting opportunity through the clerk's office. And I just thought, I've run all these logistical programs, all these volunteers, I've trained all these people for years and years. I can apply those skills to the clerk's office. And then, of course, once I had the experience as clerk, thought I could apply those skills to the Secretary of State's office.
As you alluded to, I read a 2016 interview, I believe it was, where you said that your interest in politics, that you described your interest in politics as hardwired. And so was politics always in your DNA?
I think so. My great grandfather was a county judge and in Dallas County, and so I come by it through that. My great grandmother was, the president of the Baptist League in Texas, and we always talked about politics growing up. We always watched all of the conventions, both of them. We watched the news every night. We talked politics at the dinner table. I think, and even though we weren't my family wasn't an activist family per se, I grew up very interested. And so when I saw my opportunity to get involved at the age of 18 and start working on campaigns, I kind of just took that opportunity and thought, well, why don't I put this interest into practice?
Speaking of campaigns, one of the folks that you worked for was former U.S. Senator Jeff Bingaman. What was that experience like, and what was kind of the most valuable lesson that you learned from working for former Senator Bingaman?
Yeah, well, that's where I first got my start. It was the summer between high school and college, and I was driving home from the mall one day and saw the marquee that said, Senator Jeff Bingaman's reelection campaign called 242 vote. And back then we didn't have cell phones. So I drove home and I got on the phone. And I remembered the number. It was an easy number to remember. Called the number, and I said, "Hey, I would, love to help out, volunteer, whatever." And they said, "Well, what are you doing right now?" And I said, and I said, nothing. And they said, well, why don't you come on over? So I went over and I kind of dove right in and we were doing all sorts of things back in the day, looking up people's numbers in the phone book and, typing things into databases because, the data didn't exist anywhere else and things like that. So I got a really good experience, but I think working for Jeff, he, first of all, is just a very decent human being. And also he is very policy minded. And so what I learned from him was that you can be a good, decent human being in politics, and you can be very policy minded, and you can be very successful through that model. And so I've tried my hardest to model my work through that as well. To really dig deep into policy, to become a real wonk on the issues that I really care about, and also to be a decent person and really, keep my integrity in every decision that I make. And so I think he really served as a model for me, since the beginning.
Well, you were first elected Secretary of State in a special election following Dianna Duran's resignation for fraud and embezzlement of campaign funds. Was rebuilding the public's trust and maybe even the morale of staff kind of part of the job? Was that one of the first tasks that you had to deal with or work on?
Both of those things, and it was tough, when I got there. I mean, the staff was feeling very beat down, and thankfully we had a really good caretaker secretary in between, in Brad Winter, who actually was my high school vice superintendent.
Oh, what a coincidence.
I know New Mexico is such a small place, and so I've always had a good relationship with Brad, and he had done a really good job of caretaking and really trying to get things back on an even keel. But we had a lot of work to do. So, for example, in particular on the campaign finance end of things, in terms of the so many delinquent accounts that hadn't been enforced, and of course that was like a key piece of the issue with former Secretary Duran, right? And so we really went to work on that right away. So I would say my first 2 or 3 years in particular in the office, we were just working every single day on what can we do to restore the public's trust in this office. And then, of course, it's never really ended. I mean, that is the work that continues, because I guess in government now, we are all feeling like the public does not have strong trust in government right now. So we continue to try to do that work every day.
Election administration is what most people, I think, associate with the Secretary of State's office, but the office has other duties. Can you help us understand what those other duties are?
Sure. Well, we talked just briefly now about the ethics component. We do have ethics enforcement responsibilities in terms of campaign finance, in terms of governmental conduct, although really that's more of an advisory role. We work together with the State Ethics Commission on the enforcement of the Lobbyist Act and the Campaign Finance Reporting Act. But we also run the Business Services Division for the state of New Mexico. So every single business in the state registers with our office, files updates with our office, and that is literally half of the work that we do, because believe it or not, we have a very active business community in New Mexico, and they're busy all the time, filing with us all the time. And we are working every single day to improve that process as well.
Okay. Switching back to elections, New Mexico is among a coalition of states that filed a lawsuit against the Trump administration over an executive order calling for broad election changes. You called the president's executive order unconstitutional and a blatant overreach. Tell us why.
Well, because Congress is the authority at the end of the day, and whatever Congress decides to pass, there's a very similar bill that's moving through the Congress right now to the executive order called the SAVE Act, SAVE, that would do pretty much almost all of the same things that the executive order does, but it's going through the the congressional process. Otherwise, those rights, in other words, the right to regulate elections, are reserved to the states. And that literally says that in the Constitution. The president does not have the authority to direct the states. The Congress does. And so, we feel very strongly, and I can tell you, I have colleagues, of course, on the left, but also on the right, that feel very strongly about reserving states' rights to regulate elections. We're going to challenge the constitutionality of this order. And importantly, it requires us to do things with an unfunded mandate. Things like requiring citizenship documentation, things like rolling back how much early voting we have, informing the public about all of these things, making sure voters have the kind of ID that they would be required to have. These are all things that cost money, and we don't have the funding for that at this point in time.
Madam Secretary, while testifying at a congressional committee hearing on election confidence last year, you said elections are now colored by conspiracies, misinformation, and outright lies. How has that affected your work, and has the situation improved?
It's made the last 5 years really difficult. I will tell you, we're not new to conspiracy theories in elections, both from the left or the right. That's been going on for a long time. In fact, when I first came into the county clerk's office back in 2007 in Bernalillo County, we were dealing with conspiracy theories around the voting machines in Ohio in the 2004 election, right? So it's nothing new, but it's become so much more prevalent, and it's activated so many more people, and it's become, at some point, we could deal kind of one-on-one with folks, talk with them, give them information. Maybe they wouldn't feel completely confident, but they would feel better. And it's become a barrage, right? A barrage of accusations against election officials, again, on the left and the right. In fact, one of my favorite colleagues, Stephen Richer, the Maricopa County Clerk in Phoenix, Arizona, lost his job in a primary last year to an election denier because he, a Republican, was saying, no, this is how it actually works, and being completely transparent, giving an incredible amount of information to the public, walking people through on tours and the press and really everything. And then and he still loses his job. Right. So this is the challenge that we're dealing with as election officials. And it feels like there's a group of people that trust elections and a group of people that just absolutely do not. And then, a group in the middle. So what I think we're focused on right now is, of course, maintaining the trust with those that we do have it with, but also focusing on the group in the middle that we can make sure we provide accurate information to and be as transparent as possible with.
May I ask, are there any special preparations underway for the 2026 election?
There are always special preparations underway. We're always working. It's like we get done with one election and then we start getting ready for the next one. And in fact, in between, we have the regular election in November this year, which will be all of our nonpartisan races, the school boards, the mayor's races, the city council races, et cetera. So there's never a downtime. But we are working on a couple of things. We're working on, continuing technology upgrades. We're working on making sure people can track their ballots more efficiently if they're getting them through the mail. We're working on more accessibility upgrades. Right now, what we're doing is really fine-tuning the election process because people are really happy with it here. And as I may be preempting you on a question, but we've received a #1 ranking from the MIT Election Lab. For election integrity and accessibility. New Mexico is #1, and we're really proud of that. We don't want to lose that ranking, but so we're continuing to fine tune and make improvements.
Well, congratulations on that ranking. That's great news. I think I saw or heard you say at one point that, New Mexico doesn't always end up at the top of the list. So it's nice to get some kudos there.
It is really nice, but it doesn't mean we're done, right? We always have more work to do.
As elections come up, there always seems to be this discussion and even maybe a partisan split on whether or not voters should be required to show a photo ID at the polls. What's your stance on that issue?
Well, I've long said if you show me a problem, I will help advocate for the solution. We do not have a problem with voter impersonation in New Mexico. To the extent that it happens, it's extremely rare. If you think about it, the way I like to describe it, it's a very high risk, low reward activity, right? Because if you decide to go to the polls and pretend to be somebody else, then you are risking getting a felony for the chance at one vote changing the outcome of an election. So I think most people who would even contemplate that kind of activity kind of do that calculus. When we have found people, oftentimes it turns out to be, unfortunately, just a user error type of issue with a clerk at the polls or something. They clicked on the wrong name, something like that. But when we have found it, we've prosecuted it. And I think that's what folks should really understand, is that we take a zero tolerance policy to voter fraud in the state of New Mexico. When we do find it, we refer it to law enforcement. We give it to the DAs, we give it to the AG, and we ask the judge for full penalties when it happens. And so that's why I'm not in favor, because again, at the end of the day, it feels like a huge barrier for a lot of people. If you happened to go out that day, I don't know if you're like me, but occasionally, I put I'll use my ID for something and I'll stick it in my pocket, and then I'll take my jeans off and I'll forget to put it back in my wallet. Or, you're a little abuelita, or you're a student or whatever, and you don't have the exact right kind of ID. And so, to me, the detriment to keeping somebody from voting who's eligible to vote is way greater than the risk of having somebody vote who shouldn't be, because again, we just haven't seen any real evidence of that in our state.
Okay. The 2026 election will be different in New Mexico in the sense that we'll have semi-open primaries for the first time. And I read that you were not initially a fan of semi-open primaries, and I wanted to ask what changed your mind? What happened?
Well, when I want to clarify that quote. That was when I was younger. When I was working on campaigns, I was very active in the party. And I just, I had this belief that if you want to vote for members of the club, be a member of the club, pick a side, right? And then of course, as I became an election administrator and I saw how many people were being turned away from the polls and primaries who, had made a plan to vote, they'd come out to vote, they knew, they had in mind who they wanted to vote for. Turns out, maybe even thought they were registered one way or the other. And I can't tell you how many examples I've come across, Daniel, over the years of people thinking they were registered one way, and they actually were registered as a declined estate or the other way. And then they go, oh my gosh, how did that happen? And there's a lot of administrative or just human reasons for that. But my point is that you came out to vote. And if you came out to vote, I want to see you be able to vote. And so, and participation begets participation, as we know. The data show that. So if you vote in one election, you're more likely to vote in another and another. And we want to increase participation because that creates better election outcomes and then better policy outcomes. So that's what really changed my mind over the years. Is seeing that. And I've been a huge supporter of the open primaries legislation for years now. So it was just an absolute pleasure to see it pass this year finally.
I wanted to ask you about a piece of legislation that was passed last year by the legislature, which was a bill requiring political campaigns to disclose when AI is used in ads. And I wanted to ask you, what are your biggest concerns about artificial intelligence in elections?
Well, I think my concerns are the same as the concerns that I have about any kind of mis or disinformation that's out there, because unfortunately, we all kind of live in our own bubbles right now. The algorithms kind of dictate to us what we see and what we read. And with AI, it can become even more convincing than it already is by, let's say a Russian bot writing something, or somebody with the deliberate intent to mislead, or even to make a mistake about something like, where early voting sites are, for example. And so, the challenge with AI is that it has gotten so good. And I think we all know, I think we've all become so much more familiar with the abilities of things like ChatGPT to generate written content or even imagery content. And if we don't have an awareness of, well, maybe I shouldn't believe everything I see or read on the internet, then I think we're all at risk of, and I give an example of a very close friend who's very knowledgeable sent me a video right before the election that purported to be former Vice President Pence endorsing Kamala Harris. And as we all know, former Vice President Pence did not support President Trump, but he did not endorse Kamala. And so I had to go and kind of look it up and go back to her and say, I think this is fake. I think this is AI. And she was like, oh my gosh, I should know better, but this is the risk. And so I think just having an awareness, again, everything you see or read on the internet, you shouldn't necessarily believe, and always check multiple sources and double check your assumptions.
For sure. I know that there are times where I'm on either Twitter or some sort of social media platform, and I'm thinking, is this real or not real? So I guess we all just have to keep our guard up.
That's where we are.
Madam Secretary, you will make New Mexico history as the state's longest serving Secretary of State. What are some of your proudest accomplishments?
I think, it's hard to enumerate single instances because we've done so many things, not just over the last 9 years, but since I started as county clerk. I would say in the last 20 years, we've brought New Mexico from being, I don't want to say one of the worst states, but a state with a complex election history with challenges. I mean, I always think back to 2000. We, if it weren't for Florida, we would have been Florida with all the challenges we had with election administration. And so we've gone from that to being number one and being a model for the entire country. And it's been through diligent work, policy by policy, year by year, expanding, modernizing, growing the election process, making it more accessible, bringing the integrity pieces, bringing the security pieces. So I think I would say, not to not answer your question, but to answer your question, I think it's the whole, right? It's the whole of the policy work, and not just by me, but by members of the legislature, by the current governor and previous governors, by county clerks, and election advocates. And I'm going to be really proud of the legacy that I leave.
Well, I wanted to ask you about, sort of who's coming up next. The Dianna County Clerk has already announced her intention to seek the Democratic nomination for Secretary of State. Do you plan to endorse anyone in that race?
Well, as a policy, I don't endorse anyone in races for which I oversee. So that's pretty much anyone running in the state of New Mexico. I can tell you we have some great, fantastic options on the Democratic side. And my hope is that whoever wins the Democratic primary will win the Secretary of State's office and continue the legacy.
Madam Secretary, may I ask, what does the future hold for you? After your term ends, what do you plan to do next? Take a vacation?
That is the magic. I would like a vacation. I have a few things in mind. One of the things that I've been chipping away at over the years is completing my PhD in political science. I'm at the dissertation writing stage, so I'm getting ready to embark upon that. And I've taught at UNM as an adjunct professor off and on over the years. So, that's one possibility is to go into academia. But I'm still waiting to see kind of what the universe has to offer up. And I'll just say never to running for a future office. But, I'm at the point where, it will be 20 years in public service, and that's a long career in public service. And even though I think the public has valued my service, they've kept electing me over and over, which I appreciate. It might be time to do something different. So we'll just have to see in a year and a half or so what happens.
Well, whatever you do, we wish you the best of luck. And thank you so much for joining us today. Is there anything I'm missing to ask you? Anything you'd like to share with New Mexicans who are either tuning in or watching this podcast?
Just two quick things. First of all, I just want to let the voters of the state know how much I appreciate them and you all. And the New Mexican has done a really amazing job of covering elections since I've been in office. And I'm really grateful for that partnership with you. And secondly, just to remind everyone, don't forget we have an election coming up in November. So make sure you check your voter registration at nmvote.org or get registered there. This summer, we will start automatic voter registration at the motor vehicle division. So when you go get your license or renew it, you're automatically going to be registered to vote. And you basically have to tell us no if you don't want to be registered. So that might make it easier for a lot of folks. But just please vote. That's what I always ask. Just everybody, please vote.
For sure. All right. Well, thank you again, Madam Secretary, and thank you to our viewers for tuning into Around the Roundhouse. Until next time, I'm Daniel Chacón.